Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Itzli-Ra, the podcast where we talk about all things related to enlightenment, spirituality, and
Everyday life.
my name is Carlos.
And I'm Veronica.
Welcome, guys. So today we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. It is definitely a topic that I'm really excited about, and it's something that everybody right now is up in arms about in TikTok. There's all kinds of really cool channels to follow. There's podcasts about it, and it basically is spirits, entities, attachments, and what those are, and kind of how they relate to spirituality. Because in some spiritual circles, they're like a pretty big part of it. If you look at like older cultures, um, think about the Native Americans. They're very much into that, and so are a lot of the East Asian cultures, and the Hispanic cultures are very superstitious. So there's a lot of ties. So it's just one of those things where you think about it and you're like, do those exist? Are they a creation? What do you have to say about that, Veronica? Like, where do you sit in
Where do
all of
I
it?
sit? Ha. Okay, so I do believe that there's entities because if we're all energy, right? We talk about that all the time. There's got to be more that we can't see, right? We um I don't know if I should bring this up. So when I work a lot with death, right? And I can tell you what is in the room when the child is born is the same thing that's in the room when the child leaves. So there's something energetic there that is very, very palpable. And call it maybe a soul coming in and attaching and then a soul leaving. It could be possibly like they say the angel of death uh, um, escorting someone on or loved ones escorting and I'll use that as well. Like when someone is passing or beginning that transition, what you hear is sometimes conversations that they're having with their loved one, or they see them and you don't. And those conversations are very real, and it's across the board with adults and children. It's the same thing. So to me, it makes me feel that there is something there, right? For those that are starting their transition from the physical body to their energetic full being, I think they're able to see because the veil drops for them and they're being prepared to move on to the next. And there's a few stories that I've heard from um, some of my patients that recall the same meeting place when each one of them were close to transitioning.
Huh.
So it it's kind of like, okay, that means that each one of these individuals saw the same space and place and things. So are we connected to all of that? And they're just welcoming them back into the grid or the consciousness, right?
Right. Right.
So I do believe that there is things. I do believe that sometimes some souls don't move on, they get stuck, and I'll share those things as well. um I was in one of the rooms in a hospital, and I could hear a noise, and it's the same noise of a chewing and a chewing. And I kept on hearing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? The next day, one of my regular patients was put in that room. And then all night, the mom says she couldn't sleep. And the child couldn't sleep because they heard the same chewing,
Right.
chewing. And it so happened that person, that one of them that passed there, used to enjoy a type of seed that caused
Mm-hmm.
that sound. And we were like, wow, could this be that? And they're all like things that you talk about and then you try to explain it away. But you could feel things. You could feel
Sure.
things in these spaces. Um, and some cultures believe that in liminal spaces, that's where some of these energies hang out. And that's where you can feel them because you feel a shift in that energy field. And it can sometimes cause a little discomfort, or it could just maybe cause something brighter. You can smell something and that's familiar to them. So those are uh, a few things in my experience that make me feel that, yes, I do believe that there is soul spirits that sometimes don't transition and then they stay in this earthly plane for whatever reason. I'm not 100% sure. I can speculate, why, because there's maybe a lot of pain associated with a transition, or there's something that's left unsaid, undone that keeps them in this space.
Hmm. Like I remember when we were growing up, there was a lot of activity in our house. And when we were moving in, the lady that owned the house before said, "Don't buy this house because there's a lot of spirits in it." And of course, Dad didn't believe it. He's like,
It,
"You're crazy. We're going to move into this place. Let's do it." And everything was fine until roughly we became teenagers. And then things started happening. Cabinets opening, you hear footsteps in the hallway. There's a lot of stuff that transpired there, breathing in my room on the chair, things like that. People feeling like you're getting touched. And you wonder if it's, is it a energy of something that was there before, a spirit of a person, or was it just residual energy that existed there that kind of manifested itself? Or it could have been maybe the lady, because she believed it so much, manifested that energy to exist in that space.
right, right. I
There's a
do
lot of,
believe. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say,
I
there's just a lot of different
could be
potentials there, but
possibilities.
they existed. Though I am not going to discount that, they for sure existed because we felt them
Right,
and we lived with
right,
that for a while, and
right,
it still exists there.
right. I think that a lot of the times these entities or energies show themselves a lot when there's children around, because the children, they're rapidly developing, so their energy is always high and they're vibrating really brightly, right? They're like a beacon of light. So I think that they attract the curiosity of some of these souls that may be lost. So they end up interacting with them a lot more than what people think. Like with the imaginary friends, that could be a reason behind the imaginary friend. Um, for my oldest daughter, she was able to see a lot of those things and it would freak her out. And one time she saw a policeman walking right towards her. And I talked to her about what it was, and that they can't harm you, that they need to go where they need to go, and tell them that leave. This isn't your place here. They need to go home or whatever it is, to God, to the angels, whatever she wanted to use. Um, Eventually, she learned how to handle that, but it was very real. Like, you're in front of me, that's what she would see, and she would feel that. And I would be more of a feeler and a hearer. Growing up, the same thing. The activity started when we were teenagers. That's when you have a rapid growth spurt in that time.
That's when your
And if
energy
the
is all over the
house,
place. It's very chaotic.
right, and if in the house we so happened to live in, the person there was, I want to say, a teenager, right? That ended up passing. Wasn't he in his
I
teenage
don't
years?
I don't remember.
Or he was a young adult, I want to say. Um, and possibly there was, because we were this age, there was this
Connection.
relatedness and a
Yeah.
connection, and maybe a possibility of us seeing and maybe helping, or somewhat something, I don't know, that caused a lot of activity in the house. And even still now, the last time when my I think it was, oh, your kids and mine were in the living room, and then both of them heard, "Hey,"
Yep.
like it was dead silent, and then they heard a "hey," and they're like, "What is that? Who is that?" And so there is things that are around. We just can't see them, or we don't have the gift of seeing them. Let's just
Yeah,
say that.
or maybe here's another alternative. Maybe that they're existing, but they're in a different dimension. And so there are times where you're spanning across potentially across dimensions or timelines, and maybe you certain people can actually see the in between, right? The
Right.
transitions that are happening. This is why people appear and then they disappear again. Maybe
Yeah.
you're just jumping in between those two things, or you can actually you're vibrating high enough to be able to do that, or you knowingly unknowingly do that. So I mean that's another one that could kind of changes the perspective a little bit from it being more ethereally to being a little bit more of like, hey, what if you're seeing into something that is existing in that time and space but just somewhere else?
That could be. And then once they're in this realm, they have to create a charge for them to be seen. Right? Or they if they want to show themselves, they'll show themselves in whatever way that is, by moving objects, throwing things. Again, I feel that they can't hurt you. They just scare the crap out of you.
Sure, and I
they
think that's
create
and I think
they
that's the
create
thing is
fear.
that if you don't understand it, and based on how you're raised, just because we were raised very fearful, it's bad immediately. It's evil. It's, oh no, right?
Mhm.
And it's not.
I,
It's not.
I,
It's not a thing.
yeah, so those could be, the spirits that are around. Then you can put angels in a different category as well. Those are beings that whisper in your ear and, keep you safe and maybe have you turn to a different direction so this doesn't happen to you. And so they're along the energetic kind of side as well, but their energy is more grand, but yet they don't have control over us either because we do have our own um, self, right? Our higher self, if you want to call it the seat of our soul or whatever people want to call what we have, true self, um, that is in control of this body, right? And that's the sovereignty, right? And that nothing can impede that unless we give control or permission to it to take over.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's another segue to the other side of it, which is basically like, right, so you have in a lot of cultures and a lot of beliefs, you have the good benevolent
Mhm.
spirits, the angels, the archangels, like all of that stuff. And then on the other side you have the opposite, the darkness, the demons, the devils, the whatever, dark, everything dark, 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 dark. And I think that some of that has been manifested by just the fact that people believe it to be true. Energies will take that, especially collective energies, and they'll manifest that does exist for the people that subscribe to that in that space. And I think this is why some people feel stuff like that and other people don't. They're like, I don't see it, I don't
Right,
feel it. It doesn't impact me because I don't believe that is the case.
right. I think so. I think the more superstitious and fearful that a person is, that they can make themselves more prevalent to those types of things, just because you're opening yourself up to that and the belief in that. I do know that the Catholic Church itself does have exorcists, and they're very particular about what they will take.
Right.
So there's this whole interviewing process to be able to confirm and affirm that there is an attachment that
Right.
does not belong to that person. IFS is the same way. They call them unattached burdens, the UBs,
Mm-hmm.
that are entities that were human ones, which is very interesting how they say there were human ones, but they became this entity, like
Mm-hmm.
we're saying, this thing that was fed by whatever despair, whatever sadness, whatever pain, and it creates this thing in this way and this heaviness. And they sometimes attach to people and attach to people at a younger age because they're not at a younger age. You may not be aware of stuff, and it's very also very interesting because in IFS, internal family systems, if you're working with a practitioner, they can actually remove the unattached
Attachments.
burden because it's not part of you, but it's you that have to release it.
Right.
And that's where it is. It's that you make that choice to release it and have no other attachment to it because that's how they come back in, right? Is because you still have that attachment and that uncertainty that if you're without this thing that makes this your self so grandiose that you can't live without it, then that's inviting
Hmm.
that back in. And
Yeah,
there's like plenty of books for on that.
the way I think
I
about this is I think about it as we are really good at being able to manifest, right? And I think that part of the idea of all of these established churches and religions and stuff like that is to be able to get enough collective energy to make something happen. And over time, I think that that's basically what's happened is the energy that's been collectively put out to manifest has manifested all of these things that for the people that believe it. Yes, those things do exist. Yes, those things are real because the collective belief of these massive institutions have made that so. So in their minds, those things do exist. The attachments exist, the devils exist, all of that stuff exists for them because that's what they have believed. And they
right,
made it happen in the reality that they are currently existing in.
right, and that's where the fear is feeding that, and just like with everything, a hospital, a business, whatever that, all those can be energy entities, and the energy you put into it can create an entity in the actual structure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
make people feel a certain way or not. That's just what it is. I think, yeah, it is very, very fascinating how what we put out there energetically is what we're able to see sometimes.
Exactly.
And then if you want to see something, it'll show itself, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
And
you
so,
have to again, you have to believe. I think believing is part of
mhm,
it.
mhm,
Just like
yeah,
with any practice that you engage in. I mean, there's people that love witchcraft or hoodoo or voodoo. You have to believe that it's real first. And once you're able to believe that it's real, then you start learning about it and then you start understanding how that works. But that comes with a whole set of lore that goes along with that that you now subscribe to. So
right.
then you
I
start
think
seeing
all
all of these things.
right. So all that stuff is fascinating. I think, for example, when you talk about intention and someone coming with full intention from like the emotion side, and then brought with this energy put into an object, and when they call on something to harm, right? I'm sure there's entities around there that are like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it, right? Because if that's how they function for on this earth, is that's the role they take, then yeah, that stuff could be directed to a person. But if that person that it's been sent to has a vibration that is a lot higher, or at least a consciousness that's a lot higher, and an understanding of that, they can sense that coming a mile away, right? And send it back or cut it off, and then transmute whatever that energy is.
Right.
Um, because in there's many many things people can do and set intentions out, um, to what we call cursing their own family members by
Sure.
saying certain things, and then you end up believing it, and or you know the enjoyment of possible energies that like that type of vibration, like just swirling around the area. There's like so many things that there could be, so many possibilities. But again, I feel that we're in this great universe, and there's so much within this atmosphere that we don't know what is existing and what isn't. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we sure can feel stuff. We sure like hear things captured on, recorders.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of shows me that, yeah, there is things here.
Or
And
it's
we,
interesting. The counterpoint to that is because that's become very popularized. It's gotten more people to believe, and again, more energy that goes to making that a possible reality for the people that didn't think that it existed before.
well, I think about it, Carlos. If let's just say you're an entity, we'll
Yeah,
say that. Let's
sure.
say you're an entity
Sweet.
and you gravitate towards like mischief, because that's just what you are, right? You want to pop in and show yourself somewhere. You're going to mess with someone's covers, all this stuff. So you're going to make yourself known. And then you get almost a high off of that, right? So what's going to make you stop if you have nothing else to do,
Right.
right? So you'll continue and continue. And then the more fear, the more uh, you on the receiving end freaks out about it, the more attention you're giving it, the more it'll do it, right? So that's how I believe. It's like, okay, you're here, get out of my space, right? You're not part of me. I'm a sovereign being. This is an infringement on my own free will. Move on, right? And they do move on. They do move on, but it's almost like you need to be firm and true with your stance without any doubt. Because if you have doubt, they'll pick up on it like that. And let's just say they could be just part of the field as well. So they pick up on all those vibrations,
Possibly.
right? And all those
Possibly. Yeah.
thoughts. So that's how they're able to know if you may not be fully, I don't want to really use the word strong, but fully believe that you're a sovereign being and nothing can harm you that
Well,
way.
that's the thing that that's the thing where I feel it's like a weird gray area, right? And I think that this also lends me to believe that a lot of these things have been created by the collective has created all of this stuff, right? And I don't know if it has its own consciousness. It might just be energy that exists based on the intention and the emotion that goes along with that. Um, but yeah, it could be that. It could be that is because people have emotions and they think weird things and shit happens. Yeah, you've created something that now exists and will exist until somebody decides that it's time for it to go back into the universe and dissipate back into energy that is no longer in that specific form anymore. So I wonder if most of what we see where we talk about energetic, these kind of spirits or entities or things like that are constructs of the people that have existed here, and they continue to exist until people either don't believe that those things are real anymore, or they're actually pulled and dissipated and sent away. Because if you think
Hmm.
about it, it's like how many of the things actually have sentience or intelligence or any of that stuff when you think about it like that. They've all been
Right.
created by something. Somebody believed in it, and so
Right.
somebody made it.
Right. It also is interesting because if you listen to the same explanation of these attachments and the UBs, the attachments, and um, when they use the word demon, they all growl and hiss and scream and make themselves bigger, right? But they're all the same thing. They're all the same thing. Nothing is greater than the other. It was sometimes human at one point, and it became something else because of whatever energy was fed it, right? To keep it in
I mean,
existence.
if you believe that
So
that's the case, sure. And so that's another one where I have a little bit of trouble with it, right? Because if your consciousness separates from your body, you're no longer attached. That means that now your consciousness is back where it normally should be. so it knows everything that's ever known about itself. And so why would it, again, emotions don't happen there anymore, because you've already moved out of here where the emotions actually exist, unless you're saying that emotions still exist here. And so that's why I have a hard
So
time believing that anything that was once human becomes corrupted or something in this spiritual space, because the spiritual space is all pure energy, and you remember who you were at that point.
yeah,
You have
yes,
full consciousness. So how does that happen? I don't think so. I don't subscribe to that.
to that one. So I think like let's just talk about the, whatever's in our soul, like is just an essence of the consciousness, right? You're not fully there. So there's a belief that when you when you're transitioning, it's painful time of separation, and sometimes there's a little confusion with the uh with the soul, right? And if something pulls it to stay, whatever that is, then it stays on this dense plane. But they're not fully, and they're just this energy that is left because they don't go back to the true consciousness. So that's a belief. There's, I mean, stories you can go into like purgatory. Purgatory is when the souls wander,
Sure.
right? And that's the church belief. Um, Other people believe that they need to help the soul transition and go where it needs to go. Like, a lot of the original Mexica traditions, you cross these rivers
Mhm.
to be able to make it to where your soul resides, right? So there's all these, and everyone is similar because it's the journey that the soul makes. But back to consciousness, that's what I'll use. But if in anywhere in that journey it gets stuck for whatever reason, because there's still attachment here, um, attachment to the body, attachment to whoever is mourning it or whatever it is, there's that part that does stay.
Hmm.
Now, that could be a true or cannot, it may not be true, who knows? But those are different types of beliefs. But, and the hard thing is, can you prove it? There's like I told you, sounds that were in the rooms. I can give you another example. Where I used to work, there was these antechamber, and there's double doors, and there was a window that you could see through that. Well, I was going into another room, and I looked through the window, and I see this little one, and he's like opening the door. I'm like, what is your kids doing outside in that antechamber? So I go open the door because there's automatic doors. Well, the other door just opened and there was no one there. Whoever was there showed himself and then exited through whatever.
Mhm.
And so that would stump me. I mean, there's so many things that I could say that
Sure.
I witnessed, because where I worked can say was an entity itself. It was a
Sure. Absolutely.
whirlpool of that.
Yep.
And many were positive things and many were very sad things. And um, some were beautiful and love and letting go, and some were like tragic and not, and very, very hard. So you have all those types of emotions. So if the emotions are energy, or those feelings are energy, maybe that's what got stuck,
Yeah, it could
those
totally be.
portions and timelines. So yeah, there's things that are there. We just can't explain what they are.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting, and I think that that's probably why, and I'm just me speculating, is probably why back in the day people just couldn't put yourself in that position where it's very limited, the education that exists, how you interpret the stars, superstitions, gods, goddesses, everything just and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, I saw this thing. Oh shit, it's a spirit, and it's going to do me harm, and I got to protect myself. Now I got to create these things that protect me from the spirits. And it's fascinating kind of how the human mind starts taking over, and fear response
Right.
helps, starts, creating these narratives about these things that eventually people hold to be true. And again, that manifests into what we currently have today.
Yeah, because you assign value or language or an explanation to something. And that reminds me of a thing happened when we were kids. Like we had bunk beds and I was on the top and I heard like scratch, 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 scratch,
Yeah, the
scratch.
scratch.
What is that? Scratch, 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 scratch. And I'm like, asked my sister, do you hear that? He's like, no. And then it got really hard. And then the curtains just came straight down from the room, like someone hung on them and then pulled them. The cat like flipped out and then bounced off all the walls and like, so many things would happen. Um, and so the mind went there
Of
already.
course it did.
That that the explanation could be there was some kind of animal there, but I don't know, in the little corner, like I
Doubt it.
saw it in the corner. And how did the curtains get yanked down like that? It was just all interesting timing. um Another one was when our grandmother brought home a painting from a thrift store.
Oh, that one.
Are
Yeah.
you aware of paintings from thrift stores?
There was a lot of
And
energy in that one.
in that one. And I had a dream that something was like I always do, and something was over me and holding me down. And I finally made it up, and I I'm like something's. I told mom and dad that something was there, and then dad, of course, comes with this holy water because that is the belief. That was the
Of
belief, the
course, the
holy water,
belief.
and he felt something pulling him in towards the TV. And then the painting rolled right out from way behind the television and
Mm.
just dropped right in front of him. And I
It did
thought,
that multiple times. It dropped in front of us when
yeah,
we were playing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I thought,
And remember, we saw it
wow,
was a painting of a dog, a cocker
it was
spaniel,
a
but
dog
then it
in
was
in
hanging
the
up,
box.
and we saw
He
its
looked like
face
an old man.
change. Yeah, it looked like
It
an old
looked like an
man.
old man.
Hmm.
So the story that we assigned to it
Right? The
was
fear,
is
too.
yeah, from the fear. So how much of it was real and how much of it was just something that was there.
Well, it
And
was real because we wanted it to be there, right? The energy existed there for sure. It was there
Mhm.
inherently in that painting, was a
Right.
piece of it. But
It
in
made
order for it
itself
to
known,
fully,
show itself.
create, show itself, it needed energy from everybody else.
Us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we're exuding that and we're exuding that fear, because fear is palpable,
Mhm.
and you send that out, and if it's the whole collective house that feels that,
Boom.
it's going to make a big show.
Yeah, of course. And so
It's going
that's
to make a big show.
that's the belief. And thinking back on all the fear that we had for all of those things, and the indoctrination that came along with being part of the church, you lived your life like that. It wasn't just fear of everything that existed in this reality. It was fear of things that existed in outside of this reality, in other dimensions and other planes, which is pretty wild. I mean, it's pretty wild when you think about that. Your
I
entirety of
mean,
your existence
yeah.
revolves in fear.
And let's just say, as children, if you take some of that stuff in, you're taking these stories in. And so your mind assigns these memories of things in the stories that you hear or see. So if there's an association it can make, because that's how our brain functions, it's going to make that association.
Yeah.
It's going to take it, right? There's one story I remember. One night I was just feeling like, okay, something's around, something's here. And it was like 3 in the morning, and I'm laying in bed, and this is all at mom's house. And I hear like horses, like a horse carriage. I'm like, what is that? A horse carriage? And immediately my mind went to the death carriage,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because I had like at some point in school or whatever we were reading, read on that. And then, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? And so, said a prayer, obviously, to Saint Michael for protection, and because that was and still is
yeah,
my go-to. And the next day, mom said that one of the neighbors had passed away
yep.
down the street. So that solidified for me in my brain
What you
that,
heard.
wow, this is what I heard. This is what happened. They were taking the soul right now. I don't know, but it sure sounds like a great narrative that my mind made up, right? It associated it
And
with
that's all it
with
needed.
that.
That's all it
If
needed.
that's all it needed, that affirmation that this is what it is, and this is real, and like, wow, I was able to feel that. Holy crap!
Yeah.
That was something for sure.
Yeah, I remember when I was working as an RA in college in Stafford Hall, which was one of the older halls that had been built in like the 1800s. And in the summertime, not all three levels were filled. It was just the first level, but we'd have to do walks all the way up and stuff. And so there, you would hear stuff in rooms and you knew nobody was there as you were passing. You would hear voices, you would hear things. But one night it was really late, and I think it was like 3:35 or something like that in the morning. I had to do rounds again, and I get up to the third floor, and as I'm walking around the corner, the lights start blinking as I'm walking by them. Blink, 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 blink. And I'm like, well, shit, dude, this is fucking weird. And I turn and I look and I see somebody just like barely peek out and then back. So I go downstairs, dude. I talk to the other R8s there, and I'm like, bro, I just saw some shit, dude, like up on the third floor. And he's like, hey, you're fucking crazy, man. I don't know. I'm gonna go up there real quick. So he goes up with his girlfriend. He goes up, and then I just hear screaming happening, and he comes running down, dude. And he's just like, dude, I saw this person that was like looking out of the corner of the stairwell, and they were looking at us, and the lights start blinking. I'm like, again, residual energy exists there from so many years and all kinds of crazy stuff happening. Who knows if that
I
was,
mean,
part of my suggesting that that actually existed there, or the energy that I gave off, the fear that I had at that point, because at that point I was still afraid of a bunch of that stuff, and that can, fed that to have it continue to manifest itself, or what. It was a wild experience.
yeah, I think the energy is the fear that you give off. So then it creates this boom,
Yeah, but
and
it's
this,
you. That's the thing. It's you.
yeah,
You're the one that's building
feeding
that.
that. You're feeding that. And that's why I told my oldest, don't feed it with fear. It needs to leave. It needs to leave. And don't acknowledge it because they'll be around. That's just what it is. Um, you can choose to shut that off, and you can choose to ask them to leave that space. And so it's been helpful for her, and she was able to get through childhood and teenagehood without without feeding into that. But even now, she recognizes that and understands it fully, and still sees, but chooses when to um, believe it or not. So
And I think that's one of the bigger challenges of like the whole spiritual path and the awakening part, is that you're going to experience a lot of things that happen as it relates to you're raising your vibration, and then now all of a sudden you're able to see or hear things that you weren't able to before. And a lot of that stuff can, in the way that we're wired, can cause fear. But you have to understand that it's nothing to be afraid of, because it's part of who you are, and it's part of the whole remembering process, and understanding that these are things that you can use to help benefit all of humanity. So don't there's nothing to really be afraid of.
um, I, I think a lot of what occurs is how can I put it? When there's a shift of something being there, it can be a little uncomfortable. When an energy manifests itself, it could be like a shadow, right, that you see. And so if we don't have an explanation for it, or we have a semblance of explanation from something that we learned, and usually a horror movie or whatever,
Hmm.
or what was it, Ghost Hunters, or like
All
a
of those things, right?
paranormal
Yeah.
something. Then you're automatically go into this fight or flight response. You know, you get this fear going, and then it can feed into an energy, and then it shows itself even more, and then you run away, and then it's gone. and it's like just like that those hauntings, or even if I don't even like the word hauntings, it's just the residual energy staying in a space and reenacting the same thing,
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
and over and again. And the more it gets fed, the more it is able to do or show itself in a greater form. And some people love it, and some people are scared of it. And then in some places, I feel if it really truly makes you uncomfortable, then leave.
Right.
Leave and make sure to let it know that it's not welcome to come with you,
Right.
right? And clean yourself off and move on. Yeah, because there's no sense in suffering something like that, because all it's happening is that it's feeding it more and more, and it's just creating this whole energetic field in that space that may not be healthy for individuals to stay in.
Now you also wonder about, you hear people talk about the land and the guardians of land, people, the spirits that exist, energies that exist that aren't necessarily weren't necessarily human, but exist because they're there, or they have been there since the very beginning, making sure that the land itself is not harmed in any significant way. Interesting theory, interesting idea that that the land itself, the earth itself, has an energy about it, because it does, that can manifest things in order to protect itself or to warn people even, right?
Foreign people. I think like when they talk about the tsunamis, who were the first ones to hear it, the elephants and all the animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were in tune with that shift, in that energetic shift, because they are able to see things that we're not, and they're able to hear things that we're not, right? Those subtle vibrations,
Right.
right? We kind of forgotten those things. So it's the warning, right, that gets sent out, and they end up going where they need to go, except for the humans kind of just stay and like, oh my goodness,
Oh,
what
let me go
happened?
walk towards that.
The same thing. I remember this truly, like in the desert growing up, you would almost know when there would be an earthquake,
Mm.
because there was this stillness,
Everything would just go quiet.
and the birds would stop chirping, and you cricket everything, you wouldn't hear anything. It was like dead silence. So those kinds of things are nature's way of warning us. I heard an interesting thing. We're up here where I'm at, there's a lot of amazing trees, and one in particular is the redwoods, and the redwoods are like just magnificent, and there's some energy that it gives off that
They're just
is just
ancient.
is you're just in awe. So they asked a woman that sees angels what was in this particular woods, right? And how she could explain it in its grandiosity, that there was entities like angels within them that were so grandiose that they were protecting that forest and part of those trees themselves. And that's how they would give off of that and get off that energy. And I thought, okay, that's a really pretty decent explanation for that feeling that you
Right,
get
right.
of that grandiosity, of just this feeling good kind of thing. There's another thing that, when we did one of our hikes up there, we saw this like green, like um, ethereal thing. I passed through three trees that were kind of like a in a circle, like a portal. I call it a pathway portal. And there was this like green entity is the best way of putting it. It wasn't a shadow. And we captured some of it on photo, but that's another thing that I can't explain in my mind. My old person would have said that it was, oh, a spirit of some sort, my old way of thinking. Um, I could say now that it is a protector of the forest. I could say it's an angel of the forest. I could say that maybe it's a different dimension. There's so many things
Mm-hmm.
that can be said now because of all my experiences. Um, but I have learned just to be neutral. And if there's a feeling that I want to get, I say that the tree being itself is just emanating this beauty. And
Mm.
that's what it is because it's its own being.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to trees like that, I think that every tree on the planet is connected in some way. It's like a grid, right? The energy of all of them are connected. Like we have grid that exists across the entirety of the earth. So it is very, very powerful. And in certain areas, I would think that, you know, depending on the land and what's there, it's magnified even more
Right.
from other specific places. And so you'll see a lot of it. And I think it's honestly, it's all about whatever the person who is currently there in that time and space subscribes to. If they subscribe to it being a, you know, an entity of the forest or a fae or whatever, sure, for them it
Mm-hmm.
is, and that's what that energy will appear to them as. Or if somebody
Right.
says, hey, that's a interstellar being, then it will be.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that going back to the ancients, I think that's how they would use those explanations to be able to explain the feelings that were happening within them when
Yes.
they were in these spaces. And that's why they became sacred spaces, was because they felt this increase in energy and in shifts and especially like in certain parts where the sun would come through and the energy would be magnified. And so there is whatever is happening in that space and time is whatever your mind assigns to it because that's the frame of reference you only have,
Right.
right?
But what's
Unless
super
someone else comes
fascinating
and
about
explains
that,
it.
what's really fascinating about that though, is because of how we are, we've written down, or people at that point had written down their experiences and what they saw based on their frame of reference, and that became canon. All of a sudden now that spawned this whole idea of like, oh, the, you know, the Archangel Michael and the Prince of Persia fought this titanic battle and all of this stuff happened. It's like, did you guys see that shit happen? Or was it some, you know, like some people think it's the interstellar races that came down and had this conflict, but because these people couldn't process it that way, they created this thing, and now all of a sudden it took a life of its own, and over time it's kind of maintained that level.
It's whatever is associated with that time. And I think that goes the same thing for some deities that, belonged to whatever it is that was
Mm-hmm.
there. That could be the energy being of plants, a tree, an animal, or whatever it is, and they could only associate with being a individual thing, right?
Right.
The
Exactly.
characteristics of the animal were given to, this the deity. Um,
And I bet you, if
and
you say, for example, if you had a conversation with Archangel Michael and you said, Michael, what's your true name? What have you, what, he would probably go, I've been called many names across many millennia, but Michael is what you know me by. So Michael is what I will go by because that's your frame of reference for me.
the interesting thing, like what Lorna Byrne says, is that Michael will show himself in a way that you understand, that you and only you can
Mm-hmm.
understand, because that's how you won't become scared
Right.
of what you see. Because if, let's just say, this grand energetic being shows itself to someone in a dense body with these eyes, we may become blinded by it, or we may not even see it, or we only can see like a certain part of it, So it was an interesting thing because our mind can only associate things in our mind. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, will only show us certain things. We can miss so much what's happening out in front of us because our mind does not associate value to it in that moment. So it just blocks it out.
Right. And I think
So
for that,
that could be the
for that
case.
example, I think that in your subconscious, or when you're asleep, I think you can see energetic beings fully. If you want to be able to, if they manifest themselves that way, you can see them fully for what they are, because you're in that ethereal state. When you're here in the physical, yeah, I think it's more challenging for those energetic beings to manifest themselves here, because, like you said, the vibration is so heavy. So you only get, just like us, you get a fragment of them. You don't get the whole thing, because I don't think you can get the whole thing here. It can't, it doesn't work that way. But still, like you said,
And
if it was just like, oh my god, I can't, it's too much.
there's even a belief like before, when a long, long time ago, it was a lot easier for those great beings to manifest within a human body because we weren't as heavy, you know, we were more pliable. But as we evolve, it becomes a lot harder and harder for these beings to come into existence and within our bodies. So we're just a fragment of their consciousness.
No, well,
It's interesting.
think about, again, you would use Michael, right? Michael has been associated with a bunch of things. He's associated with the sun and control of the sun. Okay, Michael could be the sun god Ra in another form, right? These beings have existed for a very, very long period of time and continue to exist in many, many forms, depending on what that culture decides and what they believe in and what their frame of reference is. And I think it's the same way for any spiritual entity. Human beings like to label things, right? So they start coming up with, oh my god, I'm going to label this as this, and this must be this, and this must be this, because I don't fully understand it, and that's how I can actually understand it. But then there's a narrative that's created around each of these individual things, and then each one of them has their own lore that's now associated with it, that is continually developed over time as it keeps, as millennia keeps passing. These things continue to develop their own sentience and their own existence and their own lore behind them, and so they exist. That's
And
why I believe they exist.
even now, it's happening a lot faster because of the internet. When 10 years ago, when you wouldn't even see some of these things, you would maybe see one possible video on, the archangels, or
Hecate or
one,
Anubis
yes,
or any one of
you
these.
name it, whoever. Now there's like all sorts of things that you have to weed through, um, because it's almost like a cut and paste of the same thing over and over
Yep.
again that gets distilled down and convoluted to the original meaning. And this is why it's so important to use discernment when, as we've talked
Correct.
about before, when you're looking at these things. I mean, searching old text would probably be a wise way of going to, because a lot of these newer things can be just like I said, a cut and paste of what was of old, um, that has been made new, without the rest of the context to it, which is the most important one. And also the always kind of diving back also would be a good idea of how people would perceive things.
Mhm.
Like we were talking about what the Vikings perceived, what the Mexica perceived, the Aztecs perceived, of the entities. What were they? How did they manifest? You're talking Odin, you're talking Quetzalcoatl, all of these things. Like, what did they what did that human person assign its meaning, and what was that original meaning? Um, and is it applicable for today for you?
I don't know. And I think that's the interesting part is that there are so many different rabbit holes that you could dive down. And I think if I had to sum up the whole of this podcast is these energies exist. There is no doubt that energies, we all have energy. We're created from energy. Energy exists everywhere in the universe and outside of it.
Mhm.
It all exists. Now, what you assign value to, that will determine what pops up for you. If you go down the rabbit hole of witchcraft, then all of a sudden you start understanding that more, and that now becomes what is in your frame of reference and your reality and everything that goes along with that. Same with any practice that you practice, it becomes that. So again, use if you're going to go down those areas of study, go for it. Study. We'll go with what resonates with you, but understand that as you start going deeper into those things, you start assigning more value to them, and then they will become part of what your current reality is.
Exactly. That's why we talk about you go through phases. The truth
Mm-hmm.
of you now could be a different truth to you in 2 years, 5 years,
Correct.
because we're ever evolving and we learn more and more. And from what I feel in my experience, it's each one kind of goes up another and up another level and more understanding and more understanding.
And more
And then
questions.
in more questions and more fascination, more
Yeah.
fascination. I think that's the thing, more fascination. But overall, for me, where my learning has taken me, that we are consciousness, and that my purpose here is to show my full expression of that I can in this body. For me, what that means to me, I no longer need to be the nurse. I no longer need to be identified with these things. I know that I'm consciousness. I know what I have inside and what I want to bring. And that's where I'm at right now.
Huh.
And I like being in that space, in that I'm connected to everything
Yeah,
in
I
this
think it's I
universe.
think it's being the impartial viewer, right? You're
That's a
not
good way of putting it.
assigning that sort of value to anything anymore. You're kind of taking it all in and pulling pieces that resonate into forming what you are truly becoming. Because there's going to be pieces that just if for you in this time and space it that's not for me. I know that's not for me, but this resonates. Let me explore this a little bit more, or let me explore that, or let me listen to that speaker because there's something that I feel I need to get from there, and just kind of
Right.
building that together. But you're not holding judgment. You're not doing any of that because this is your journey for you
Right.
alone, and how you learn and how you continue to move forward on your spiritual path. It's not for anybody else, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't be
And how,
judging or comparing yourself to where everybody else is.
and I've also learned that how I can do that is through compassion and the expression of love, not the sentiment of love, but the expression of love. And it's a great space to be in. And I think that's how I am able to show what my light is on the outside, right, of this dense body. Meat suit, whatever you want to call
Meat soup. There you go. Meat suit.
it.
Meat suit. All right, y'all. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. I would be very interested. We would be very interested to kind of hear what your guys' take is on this because there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And I know there's some people who heavily believe in one part of the spirit world and how all of that ties into the regular world. So if you have any opinions, if you have any takes, feel free to reach out. And if you have something you feel really strongly about it, we'll bring you on the podcast and we'll
Yep.
talk to you about it. Because
Chat about it.
again, we're open to all kinds of different viewpoints because again, we're not the holders of everything. We're not the holders of all truth and all knowing.
Yep. Yeah, thanks everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you have any also stories of things that happened to you when you were kids,
Yeah. Or even
and
now.
or even now, yeah, things that you may have seen or or felt, we'd be more than happy to take a listen.
Yep. All right, y'all. Peace.